Hey Wyandotte. Today we are starting a new summer series called Beyond the Bible. What we're going to do is we're going to be taking a look in short snippets at things that are Bible adjacent. We're not going to be studying specific books of the Bible. Instead, we're going to look at things that are all around the Bible, that provide the background, the surrounding context, things that, if we know about them, will help us know more about what's taking place in the Bible. It'll help us to learn, to apply these things to our understanding of the background of the Word, and hopefully help us to appreciate the Word even more. I had a seminary professor who once said, "Never fail to educate the people of God. It leaves more room for the Holy Spirit to work." We want to be people who are lifelong learners, and so learning about the background and the surrounding context of the Bible is important for us in our growth and discipleship as Jesus followers. Now, these videos are not going to be comprehensive dives. Rather, I want to just show you a couple things, point you in the right direction, and hopefully whet your appetite for you to learn a little bit more on your own. Maybe give you a few resources to further your learning. Today, we're going to start off talking about empires. Throughout the Bible, the second half of the Old Testament, throughout the whole First Testament, there are these huge empires that are ruling the ancient known world at the time, and that are ruling over Israel. But a lot of people, I think, have trouble knowing exactly when those things are. When did that happen? Which empire was ruling then? What's the order of these things? And so I just want to list these out for you, show you the order of them, and tell you where you can find them in the Bible so you have a greater understanding of the storyline and the flow and the background for these different books of the Bible that were written. We start with the Assyrians. The Assyrians were from Mesopotamia and were kind of known as a ruthless empire who would go conquer different cities and small kingdoms, and they would take the people and would export them and exile them and ship them all over their empire, mixing them up. They ruled for about 300 years, from 911 BC till about 612. Where can you find this in the Bible? Well, 1 Kings and most of 2 Kings, but also in a number of prophets like Isaiah, Hosea, Amos, Micah, Nahum, Habakkuk, Zephaniah, to name a few. Also, it's important to note, they destroyed the northern kingdom of Israel in 722 BC. So they're the first major empire. The next one is the Babylonians. They're located in modern-day Iraq, and they defeat Nineveh, the capital of the Assyrian Empire, in 612 BC. But their reign was much shorter. They only reigned until 539 BC. And so they're found in the end of the book of 2 Kings, but also in Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and the very first part of Daniel is under Babylonian rule. It's important to note, they destroyed the southern kingdom of Judah. They destroyed Jerusalem and burned the temple in Jerusalem to the ground in 586 BC. And they also exiled the people of the southern kingdom this time, transporting them all throughout their empire. Our next empire is the Persians. They ruled from 539 till about 330, almost 200 years. And they're in modern-day Iran. So we see this progressive movement eastward in these first three empires. We see them in parts of the book of Daniel. Also, the book of Esther takes place during Persian rule. Then you've got Ezra, Nehemiah, and prophets Joel, Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi. Then after them, we get to this period of time in between the two testaments, the Old Testament and the New Testament. There's about a 400-year gap in there. But there were still big empires who were ruling. The next major empire is the Greeks. A man named Alexander the Great came and as a very young man conquered the whole known ancient world at that time. He defeated the Persians. He had a vision. He wanted to bring Greek culture to the world. And so he brought Greek philosophy and Greek society and culture and literature. But also he wanted the whole world to speak one common language, Greek. And so that's where we get Koine Greek from, the language that the New Testament was written in. And so the Greeks overall rule Israel specifically from about 330 until 140 BC. That's their direct influence on Israel. They lasted a little longer than that, but that was their influence on Israel. However, Alexander the Great died young, and he didn't have anyone to pass his empire to. And so 4 of his main generals split up this big, huge empire that he had amassed and ruled it for themselves. They're known as the Diadochi, which just means the successors. And so they did this. They ruled in this new Greek empire that Alexander had started, and they just had their different portions of it. But in 140 BC, Israel was finally able to do something they had wanted to do the whole time these big empires were ruling over them. They defeated the powers, batted them back, and said, we're going to rule for ourselves. And so the next, not great empire, but the next rulers of Israel are the Hasmoneans. This is a family of Judean priests who end up ruling from about 140 to 37 BC, almost 100 years. Now, most of this takes place while the Greeks are still ruling, but they were able to rule Israel by themselves. You'd think it'd be a good thing, but ultimately they ended up being pretty corrupt, and they ended up taking lots of bribes or trying to ingratiate themselves with the various different Greek empires around them. It wasn't necessarily the greatest time. If you want to know more about them, you can read about how this family took over and how Israel was once again ruled on its own in the books of the Maccabees. After that, we get another family that rules for a period of time, the Herodians. They rule from about 37 BC until 44 AD, underneath the larger umbrella of Roman rule, but they're the family ruling Israel for that 80-year time period. And it all starts with a man named Herod the Great, and then his sons and grandsons and various relatives. Now, Herod the Great, that's the guy who was ruling when Jesus was born. And so this family has direct rule over Israel and Judah during the life of Jesus, so the 4 Gospels, and also the very early church, the book of Acts. And finally, we get to our last empire, Rome itself, ruling directly over Israel from 44 AD and then beyond. They last all the way until 476 AD, a massive empire. And so you've got the rest of the New Testament and beyond. All the different epistles are written during this time. And again, just like Babylon had done, Rome ended up destroying Jerusalem as well and burning the second temple to the ground in the year 70 AD. So that's it for our empires. Those are the huge empires ruling during the biblical times. But all of this is part of a larger discussion on Bible timelines. I find it so helpful if you know the story, the arc of what God has done. If you're able to sum up in 5 minutes the overall 30,000 foot view of the Bible story, starting in Genesis chapter 1, going all the way to when Jesus comes back in Revelation, that is so helpful. For one, whenever you're reading, at any given point, you're going to know where you are in the story, where the story has been, and where the story's going. But I think it also helps in evangelism, being able to tell someone, here's what God did with God's people. Here's the grand arc, the overarching narrative that culminates in Jesus. And so these empires that we talked about are just a portion of that, showing you the background behind what's going on in any given biblical text and what the people were feeling and who was ruling over them. So I provided a couple resources. I provided you a very easy flow with a few bullet points to memorize for that whole grand Bible timeline, starting in Genesis chapter 1. But I've also provided a list of these various empires, what we just talked about. Don't worry about memorizing all the dates and everything like that. Knowing the order is really, I think, the most important part. Also, you can find all sorts of different Bible timelines if you look on Google. Some of them are going to be really simple, and some of them are going to be extremely detailed. But for now, that's our look beyond the Bible. I'll see you next time, church.